Happy New Year and welcome to the January 2022 forecast. I'm Rick Levine and we are going to take a look at the astrology for the month ahead and actually for the first month of the new year ahead. I have a number of different things online that are forecasts for 2022. I'm not going to be doing an overview of the entire year at this point in time. We're going to stay focused on the month of January. I would like to, before I jump in, thank all of my patrons. Patreon.com/Rick Levine for sponsoring this work and the other videos that I do online. You guys are appreciated. Um, for those of you who are interested in a 2022 forecast, the current edition of the Mountain Astrologer that you can either get in physical hard copy or online, I have an extensive article that is my overview and forecast for 2022, and that is in the current edition of the Mountain Astrologer. One last thing I'd like to mention, and that is that many of you know that my Instagram account had been stolen, and I am in the process still of trying to get that back. Pay attention. I will be notifying people when that is back up and running. In the meantime, you can find my dailies not only on Facebook at Rick Levine Astrologer, but also on Instagram at Rick Merlin. That's Rick, my name, Merlin, all one word, Rick Merlin. And they will be posted there until I get the full account back, and I'll keep you posted on that. So that's business. With no further ado, I'd like to jump into January of 2022. And January of 2022 is intriguing because it seems to be the first month in a while, regardless of what year it falls in, where we have a little bit of breathing room. There's, I don't want to say that there's not a lot going on. There's a lot of activity, but the activity in January is what I call high frequency activity. It's activity of the inner planets. We are, as most of you know, through the third and final exact square of Saturn and Uranus that occurred on December 23rd, 24th, right in there, depending upon where you are on the planet. However, we will see that that energy of the Saturn Uranus square lingers with us through a lot of 2022. We will be revisiting that, but this month in particular, January and even into February, the orbs grow pretty quickly. So in other words, the Saturn square Uranus was exact the last week in December, and now as we go into January, because Saturn is moving direct and Uranus is still moving retrograde, that the 90-degree angle is getting less and less, and by the end of January, that orb will be as wide as nearly 5 degrees. And so it's very intriguing as to how fast it's going to feel like we're moving away from those conflicts of last year, maybe even of the last several years. On the other hand, don't be fooled by what's going on the surface, because there's more going on more going on than meets the eye. Couple of peculiar things about January of this year. Actually, this is really the first few months of the year, and that is that January has a new moon that we will get to, we will look at in a little bit. It has a new moon on January 2nd, a full moon on January 17th, and then a second new moon, sometimes referred to as a blue moon, on January 31st. Actually, that's often in traditional terms, it's the second full moon of a month, or the fourth full moon of a quarter of a 3-month period of time. Regardless of what we call it or not, January has two new moons, which is not all that unusual, except that March also has two new moons. And I don't know that I've ever seen that. These are calendar oddities. They're not really astrologically significant, but the fact is that February has no new moons. And so it turns out that there's two new moons in January, and then in March there's no new moons, and then in February there's no new moons, and then in March there are two new moons again. Again, one at the very beginning of the month on the 2nd, and the other one on the 31st. Kind of just a weird observation. I'm sure that people will be making more of it than I think there is, but you heard it first here. Um, the other thing I want to talk about before I actually get into the day by day play of the planets is the fact that we have some retrograde energy. We've just had Jupiter changing signs. This is the first full month of Jupiter in Pisces. We'll be talking more about Jupiter not only next month, but over the months ahead, because Jupiter does some traveling this year, moving from Pisces into Aries, back into Pisces, back into Aries, and so we'll be talking about Jupiter later on. I want to talk though just for a moment about the retrograde and direct situation, because we are in the midst of a little bit of a shifting energy there. We've had over the past several months, we've had the outer planets one by one drop off of their retrograde and move direct. And we have basically Uranus as the last holdout, um, the last holdout of the outer planets. And Uranus will be turning direct on January 18th. So all of the outer planets then will be moving direct. Whereas just a few months ago, back in September, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Chiron, Neptune, and Pluto were all moving retrograde. And so that direct energy, I think, is important, because when the outer planets are moving direct, we are definitely moving into new territory. And it's going to feel like that. 2022 is, in fact, a separation from what has gone on. We're not completely done with that. You'll hear me, I'm saying that a lot this year. But the energy does feel different. Part of that, I think, is because we begin this year with Jupiter in Pisces, where it had been in Aquarius for a large part of the of 2021. I want to spend a moment, though, talking about the Mercury and the Venus situation, because here we have a little bit of retrograde direct shuffling going on. I spoke a little bit about this, excuse me, last month on December's forecast, because in fact, Venus actually turned retrograde on December 19th. And there was one little piece that is interesting with this Venus retrograde direct. I'm going to mention it, and you'll hear more about it in a month or so. And that is the fact that Venus lined up with Pluto, a Venus-Pluto conjunction, really taking our feelings deep. And that was on December 11th, just a few days before Venus turned retrograde on the 19th. Venus then lined up with Pluto a second time on Christmas Day on the 25th, again bringing that intensity, bringing the power, bringing the depth of feelings really up to the surface. Venus turns direct on January 29. So Venus is retrograde pretty much the entire month of January. And we'll talk about some of those aspects in a little bit. But Venus turns direct on January 29th. She pulls all the way back to 11 degrees of Capricorn. And then as Venus moves forward, Venus by the first few days of March March 3rd exactly, Venus will again be lined up with Pluto, and we can expect some of the intensity of not only in personal relationships, but even in the geopolitical news and the economy, in relationship to the pandemic, in relationship to so many other things. We can see things coming out into the open around that beginning of March, when Venus, having moved direct the end of January, actually catches up with Pluto for the third and final time at 27, almost 28 degrees of Capricorn, and then moves into, and then Venus will move into Aquarius on March 5th. So we have Venus retrograde in Capricorn for the entire month of January. Mercury is a slightly different story, because Mercury actually moved into Capricorn mid-December. And on December 29th, Mercury reached 24, almost 24 and a half degrees of Capricorn. And at that point in time, on December 29th, the 28th, 29th, 30th, right in there, Mercury was conjunct both Venus and Pluto. Remember, Venus was catching up with, for the second time, with Pluto on Christmas Day. So during this period of time, Mercury enters the shadow, which is the point at which it will retrograde back to, and it will do that by February 3rd, but we'll get there in just a second. Okay, so we have Mercury on December 29, conjoining Venus and Pluto, and entering its shadow. On January 1st, Happy New Year, on January 1st, at 11:09 p.m., so it's late in the day, and all times that I give you will be Pacific Standard Time. So late in the day, late in the evening, on January 1st, Mercury enters Aquarius, new sign. And by the middle of the month, at 10 degrees of Aquarius, Mercury on January 14th will turn retrograde. Mercury retrogrades all the way back into Capricorn by January 25th. And by February 3rd, it turns direct, and it's pulled all the way back to 24 degrees of Capricorn. So we have this backward motion of anyone who has any planets at, let's say, at 24, 25 degrees of Capricorn, or all the way through the early degrees of Aquarius. That, for that matter, anyone who has any planets at 24, 25 degrees of any cardinal sign, that's Aries, Cancer, Libra, or Capricorn, and planets at the early degrees of any fixed sign, that's Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius, that Mercury direct retrograde direct will actually go over those planets 3 times, creating a bit of a whirlpool, or a stuck energy, or a scenario where the energy really intensifies and deepens. So on February 3rd, Mercury turns direct. And then as it's moving forward, on February 14th, Mercury enters Aquarius again. And then it actually leaves its shadow. It starts moving into brand new territory on February 23rd, when it reaches 10 degrees of Aquarius and 20 minutes. So we'll talk a little bit more about these, about Mercury and Venus, for sure, as we unfold the month. But we need to understand that we enter the year with Venus retrograde, and it stays retrograde all the way through the end of January. And we enter the year with Mercury still direct, but having already entered its shadow period, that period that it will transverse 3 times before it's done. And it's already stirring up energy, and it's already kind of assuming that there will be things that will happen in the future that are still tied to what's going on now. So that's the Venus and the Mercury and Venus report. And with no further waiting, let's pull up a chart and see what we got. Okay, so here we are looking at a chart for January 1st, 2022. And all charts in these presentations are Aries rising, which means there's no horizon in it. Houses don't work. Why do I do that? Because wherever you are on the planet, that determines the ascendant, the midheaven, and the cusps of the houses. And because you are scattered all around the globe, I don't know where you are. However, I do know that on January 1st at 12 p.m. Pacific time, that all the locations of all these planets are exactly correct. And what that means is that if you adjust for your time zone, if you're, let's say, on the East Coast of the United States, these charts that I'm looking at for 12 noon, they'll be 3 hours ahead for you. So it'll be 3 p.m. rather than 12 p.m. But if you adjust these for your time zone, then the actual locations of the planets by degree and minute and the aspects will be exactly correct. Again, we lose the houses in this kind of discussion, but when we look at world transits, we're really not interested in houses. We're only interested in houses if we're talking about an event that has a locality, like a natal chart. You're born in a particular place, and therefore there are houses because there are cardinal points, there is an ascendant, a midheaven, etc. The other thing that I'd like to note here is that the aspect lines in the center are thicker as the orbs get closer to zero. It's just an easy way of seeing as we're looking at this chart. We can see that the closest aspect would be the sun trine to Uranus. And because the sun moves faster than Uranus, this aspect has already happened. But that aspect is within a half a degree of orb, so that angle is the aspect line is rather thick. Whereas if we look at the Mars trining Chiron, there that line is rather thin because Chiron 8 degrees, 8.5 degrees of Aries to Mars at 13. That's 8 to 30. Yeah, that's a little bit over 5 degrees. And so, because that's a 5 degree orb, those lines are rather thin. Now, again, this is just a way in helping us look at charts for this type of presentation. For those of you who are new, the red lines represent squares and or oppositions. The blue lines represent trines and sextiles, an easy flow of energy. Where there are green lines, they can represent either quincunxes or semisextiles. And orange lines, where they do show, represent either half squares, they're semi-squares, or square and a halves. That's a sesqui-square. So that's the color index that I use. And let's note the planets on the opening day of the year. Often we look at a chart for 12 a.m. as the first moment of the first day. But again, because we're all over the world, that first moment for you will vary depending upon what time zone you're in. So we're just sticking here with the 12 noon. The only time I'll change the time of day is when we're looking at a lunation at a new moon or a full moon. We do notice that we have the moon lingering in Sagittarius. It will be moving into Capricorn yet today. And we can see, because the moon moves faster than the sun, we're heading for a new moon, which we will look at that chart in just a moment. And that chart will be on January 2nd, actually 10:33 a.m. Pacific time on January 2nd. But on January 1st, we can see that we have 4 planets in the sign of Capricorn. Although Mercury is just getting ready to change signs. Remember, as we talked about earlier, though, Mercury is going to turn retrograde and back up into Capricorn again. And so we have a little bit of shuffling of that Mercury. But while in Capricorn, Mercury is rather serious and kind of oriented towards saying what is. I think it might have been Grant Louis once who said that Mercury in Capricorn says the sofa is a sofa. meaning that someone else go, oh, that sofa is a period piece from a certain blah, 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 or that sofa fits, it's a very modern and it fits in with the scheme of the room, or that sofa looks comfortable. But the Capricorn energy just tells things like it is. They can be very calculating, but it's kind of stripped of value judgments, and wants to just be able to communicate things as they are. We will lose that later today when that Mercury slips into Aquarius, where it will be all the way through. Let's see, it goes back into Capricorn on January 25th. Um, but the thing is that while Mercury is in Aquarius, as it will be for most of this month, we're looking ahead, we're looking into the future, and we're getting a lot of emphasis as we move into this year. We're a bit cautious, but there's a sense that we're actually moving into something new, we're moving into the future. Remember, we do have Saturn in Aquarius, and as the faster moving planets, Mercury and then Venus and the Sun, as they, and of course even the moon on a faster basis, as they all move through Aquarius, they're all going to bump up against Saturn. And so there's this bit of hesitancy, I think, for us to move too quickly, too fast into the future. Although we're ready to let go of all that stuff that we've been holding on to. We have Venus in Capricorn, Venus retrograde, as I said, for the entire month, pretty much. In Capricorn, Venus is also rather austere. Venus in Capricorn is willing to forego the fun and games in the moment, the spontaneous, excitement, for something that's more serious, something that's more lasting, something that's more enduring. That Venus in Capricorn is willing to save money for something important. Venus in Capricorn is willing to forego the spontaneous and or frivolous gratification in the present moment for a sustained and long-term gratification or happiness. And of course, the sun also in Capricorn, the inner planets, actually the sun, Venus, and Mercury will all move into Aquarius, as will the moon rather quickly. Pluto, of course, will stay in Capricorn for another year. It's been there for about 14, 13 years already, since I think 2008. And it will stay there for another year before it moves into Aquarius. Capricorn energy strong, Capricorn energy profound. We also have Mars in Sagittarius. Mars in Sagittarius likes to shoot for the stars. Mars in Sagittarius isn't afraid of overstepping its boundary in order to get to where it's going. Mars in Sagittarius almost doesn't care if it gets to where it's going, as long as it's going somewhere, and where it's going, it has integrity and it has meaning and it has importance. It's like that Mars in Sagittarius is aiming towards some point high in the sky, and as long as those ideals and as long as those the integrity toward aiming in that direction is maintained, that Mars in Sagittarius will be happy. And then, of course, we have Jupiter having just moved into Pisces. We'll have a lot more to say about this as the year unfolds. But Jupiter has been in Aquarius, has been a bit quirky, has been futuristic, has been seeing the possibilities. It's been seeing the potential. Prior to that, Jupiter in Capricorn was very cautious about moving into the future. And remember, this is where a year ago, December, where Saturn and Jupiter aligned, they were both in Capricorn. But now, as Jupiter moves into Pisces, we have an opportunity to allow our imagination to hold the reins. This is good news and bad news. You'll hear a lot about this as the weeks and months unfold. But Jupiter in Pisces is about being uplifted by our sense of wonder, our sense of spirituality. Venus in Pisces says that we can grow and we can expand. We can see the potential if we allow ourselves to leave the Saturnian world of facts and figures and really step into the world of imagination. Now, there is one warning here, and that is that it's easy to step into that world of imagination and believe that it's real. This is the danger. We want to have an understanding of how our imagination can actually build the scaffolding for Saturn to come sweeping in later on and create the reality behind the visions and the imagination that Jupiter has as it moves through Pisces. So this is the story for January 1st. Let's move this ahead a day at a time. Oh, and also on January 1st, I think I mentioned this. I said it was just past at noon, but that sun trining Uranus was actually exact very early in the morning. In fact, that was a part of the New Year's Eve energy, perhaps the excitement that we haven't had for a few years about the potential of a new year, the sun trining Uranus, Uranus being the future, the quirky, the inventive, the new, and I think that this is an exciting way to start the year. Mercury, as I already mentioned, moves into Aquarius late on the first at 11:09 p.m. Pacific time, and then I'm going to move this ahead to January 2nd, and we can see that at noon the moon is already past the sun. I'm going to correct this and bring this back to the new moon itself. Here we have the new moon chart for 10:33 a.m., and that is Pacific Standard Time. This shows the sun at 20 degree Capricorn, 12 degrees Capricorn, 20 minutes, and the moon at 12 degrees Capricorn, 19 minutes. That's within a minute of arc. That just means that it happened, that the new moon actually occurred at 10:33 and maybe about a half. So it's right down to the seconds, but we're within a minute of arc. And this certainly is the new moon in Capricorn. This new moon, although it's a couple degrees past, or it's about a degree and a half past the trine to Uranus, still has some of that energy captured in the new moon. We're still feeling the blast forward, the excitement, the we're moving somewhere new, we're letting something in the past go, and there is a bit of excitement here. There's something that is giving us the permission to let go of stuff that's been holding us back, and to actually move into the future. The other thing here that's still part of this new moon is the Saturn square Uranus, even though it's technically over. You can see here that it's still just about a degree, just a little bit over a degree from being exact. Uranus being at 10:55 Taurus. If Saturn was at 11:55 Aquarius, that would be exactly 1 degree. So it's 1 degree and another 10 minutes of arc. And so it's pretty darn close still. And so this new moon still has contained within it that whole sense of the old and the new, and the what is possible. Let's move ahead to January 5th, where we have Venus making a sextile with Neptune. Actually, the fifth and the sixth together create a little scenario, because on the fifth we have Venus getting along really smoothly with Neptune. This is dreams and fantasies. This is our imagination. Neptune, Venus. It's sweet. It's we like it. There's something here that's really working, and yet by the sixth, Mercury. Let me move this ahead one more day. By the sixth, Mercury makes a half square to Neptune. That's 45 degrees. And that's a bit more annoying and a bit disruptive. And it's almost like, although we like the fantasy, logic comes in and says we can't make it work. And on top of that, to kind of bring that even home more, we have the sun at 16 degrees, 16 and a half degrees of Capricorn. making a half square with Jupiter. Again, it's hard to know how much to go forward, how big to make the dream. There's a sense of that Capricorn energy wants to hold it back and make it real, but that Jupiter wants to just kind of float off into the ethers in that hot air balloon and kind of float off into the sunset. By January 8th, we have the Venus, which is retrograde, is now backed into the sun. It comes between the Earth and the sun. Remember, retrograde planets are always closer to the Earth than they are when they're direct, which means that when Venus is conjoined the sun, if it's retrograde, Venus is on the Earth side of the sun, an inferior conjunction. It's between the Earth and the sun. It's almost like Venus is more intense and the energy can't get out. It's hard to express it because there's so much of it. Whereas if Venus was on the far side of the sun, moving direct, the energy would be escaped, but it would be hard to see or to know because it's invisible. It's on the far side of the sun. The sun basically blots it out. In either case, it's hard to see Venus when she's so close to the sun. And yet here it's almost like there's a synthesis of where we're going and what our goals and ambitions are, the sun, and what feels good, Venus. And so I think that this can be actually a good moment in time to regroup and think about how what we want is in fact what we are working for. We move ahead to the 9th, and on the 9th, we have Mercury forming a sextile with Chiron. This is a day for good communication, especially around areas that have been delicate or problem areas, areas where we may have caused someone else pain or someone maybe caused us pain. Maybe it was an emotional situation. Maybe it was a work situation and something happened that just didn't feel good. That Mercury sextile to Chiron is the ability to talk about it. It's the ability to work it out in an intellectual and maybe dispassionate, non-emotional manner, so that we can move past it without holding on to those things that otherwise could be troublesome or a problem. By the 10th, we have the sun now making that sextile with Neptune that Venus had made just a couple of days ago. Remember, Venus is backing up, sun's moving forward, the sun moves into that sextile. It's almost like for the last several days, we still have that fantasy or those fantasies floating around. There's a bit of dreaminess here. There's a bit of anything is possible is happening. And yet on January 10th, we also have Venus making a half square with Jupiter. And this may be a signal from the cosmos that we've overindulged, we stepped too far, we've taken on too much, we've overcommitted. And this is something that is just like an acknowledgement that we can pull back or that we need to pull back in order to make something last. On the 11th, we have Mars in Sagittarius making a square with Neptune. This is a bit tougher than the other Neptune aspects that we've seen so far, because it's almost like it's almost like Mars is all dressed up and ready to go on an adventure in Sagittarius, ready to fly into outer space, ready to tackle some problem that may take years of study and work to figure something out. But Mars is ready to go, and it's square Neptune, and Neptune is saying, well, maybe you're not going in the right direction. This can be a bit, I was going to say debilitating. That might be a little strong. It can be a bit discouraging because we can feel like we're heading in some direction to only realize that we're going in a different direction that we thought, or to realize that the direction we're heading in isn't really where we want to go. And we may actually have to pull back and start off again. Um, I think that with Mars square Neptune, I think it's important for us to cut ourselves some slack and to cut slack for those that we work with or love, because we need to understand that there could be a false start here. Moving ahead again a few days, we see Mercury now slowing down. Mercury, which can move as fast as nearly a couple of degrees a day. Here it's moving less than 1 degree a day. On the 12th, it's at 10 degrees Aquarius, 4 minutes. Then it's a quarter of a degree. It's moved to 10 degrees, 17 minutes. You can see there's a little tiny S here by the Mercury. That means it's stationing, getting ready to make its station and then turn retrograde on the 14th, 10 degrees, 19 minutes. If we move this ahead, the next day it's 10 degrees, 9 minutes. The next day it's 9 degrees, 48 minutes. So in 5 or 6 days, Mercury has barely moved a degree. Let's come back to the day that it turns retrograde, and that is on January 14th. I think it's interesting here, and we saw this last year with a couple of Mercury transits. We can see that Mercury reaches 10 degrees and 19 minutes. Let's back this up. Yeah, here it's 10 degrees, 17 minutes. A day later, it's 10 degrees, 19 minutes. And then a day later, it's backed up to 10 degrees, 9 minutes because it turns retrograde. That 10-degree, 19-minute Mercury is a square to Uranus at 10 degrees, 49 minutes, but it doesn't quite reach it. It doesn't get there. It's not what we say perfected, because it would take that Mercury reaching 10 degrees and 49 minutes, which it doesn't do. So in fact, that Mercury backs way up. And then 3 weeks later, it turns direct again. And about a month and a half down the road or more, Mercury will then catch up with Saturn and will square Uranus and catch up with Saturn. One other thing that I want to make a note here, I know I've said this before, but here we can see it in play, or we can see it almost in play, and that is that if that Mercury didn't turn retrograde, it would make a square to Uranus, and then it would make a conjunction to Saturn. It's very significant now that Uranus is at a lower degree than Saturn. This is new. This is new now after the square, the Saturn-Uranus square is over, because prior to that, let's say Mercury would make an aspect to Saturn, holding the energy back, and then to Uranus, kapow, exploding it through and running it through the system. Now it's working just the opposite. We may get an almost taste of this now, but I think that the rule that we will see this year is things happening and looking like they're really, really happening, moving through the breaking through the energy and moving into something new, and then having to pull back a little bit just to step back to make it hold, to make it real. So this is an interesting dynamic. And we can see that on January 14th when Mercury turns retrograde. On the 16th, we can see that the sun moving about a degree a day. On the 14th, it's at 24 degrees. Pluto's at 26, Capricorn, and then it's at 25. And boom, on January 16th, the sun lines up with Pluto. The sun lines up with each of the outer planets once a year. This is a synthesis of that outer planet, kind of channeling the energy and its vitality. What is this about? This is about the depths. This is about the underworld. This is about the psychology of everything that's hidden. This is about all those things that are down around our root chakra, that are buried, that are suppressed, that when the sun shines there, we can actually see some of these things and potentially work with them and bringing them into the light, where we can actually work with them rather than having them run our lives. Moving ahead a couple of days, by January 18th, we see that Mercury forming a sextile to Chiron. Now, remember, we had this Mercury sextile Chiron back on January 9th, but now it's retrograde Mercury. So we may be covering the same material or similar material to what we covered back on January 9th, when Mercury was sextile in Chiron, but Mercury was direct. Incidentally, that Mercury will sextile Chiron a third and final time, but not until after it goes direct, and it won't reach that point until sometime in mid-February. Remember, this is about talking about it. This is about taking that opportunity and saying, I missed my chance last time round. What is it that if I bring out into the open, that if I talk about, that there's potential for healing, that there's potential for forgiveness, there's potential for leaving something behind and moving on. Now, we also have here the strength of Uranus feeding into this, because Uranus on the 18th turns direct. Uranus is stationary here. Like I mentioned earlier, Uranus is the last of the outer planets to turn direct. So we now have all the outer planets moving direct, really giving us a feeling of moving into new territory, really moving into new territory. However, let's note here that that Uranus makes its direct station at 10 degrees Taurus, 49 minutes. I can back this up just watching the Uranus here. I can back this up one day, still 10 degrees 49, 2 days, still 10:49, three at the exact same place, 4, 5, 6, 7. So for a week, Uranus has not moved 1 minute, 1/60th of a degree. In fact, we can go back all the way to January 11th, 10th. Now it's only 1 minute away, 2 minutes back. It's picking up speed a little bit. But look, on January 1st, Uranus was at 10 degrees, 56 minutes. And it was retrograde, but not retrograding very fast. And then on January 18th, that Uranus is 10 degrees 49 minutes, barely 56, 49, 7 minutes of arc away, but it's going to take time for it to build up speed, because here's the 19th, it's still 10:49, the 20th, 21st, 22nd, 23rd. It's not until the 24th where Uranus has actually moved 1 minute. That's 1/60th of a degree. And if we take it all the way up to the end of the month, that Uranus has barely moved a few minutes of arc. So when we say that an outer planet like Uranus turns direct, things should really start moving. No, don't believe it. Things should start to feel like they're going to start moving, but it doesn't happen overnight. It takes time for it to unfold, because these planets, especially the outer planets, when they change directions, they do it so slowly. Now we have a little bit of an instigator here, because on the 18th, on the day that Uranus turns direct, we have Mars making a square and a half. A square is 90 degrees, a half a square is 45 degrees. A square and a half is 90 plus 45 is 135 degrees. And we have Mars exactly 135 degrees to Uranus on the morning of the 18th. And Mars is fiery and assertive and aggressive, and it can really kick up that Uranian energy. It almost makes it so that Uranus moving direct feels like it's on the launch pad, and Mars has matches. And so Mars is lighting that fire, but it's not going to blast off in the way that we think it is. It's still going to take time. Although something could happen that is a bit disruptive, because that energy certainly can be stimulated by that Mars square and a half to Uranus. On the 19th, we also later in the day, actually, at 6:39 p.m., we have the sun moving from Capricorn into Aquarius, and we can kind of see here the interplanet movements that happen in clusters. Is kind of moving from Capricorn into Aquarius, although we do have Mercury retrograde and we have Venus retrograde still heading back till, till the 29th of January, but then it will turn around and Venus and Mercury will move into Aquarius, leaving just Pluto there. Actually, by then, Mars will kind of pick up the tail end and also be moving there. But what we have as the sun moves into Aquarius, we have the realization of how weird Aquarian energy is, especially in the northern extreme climates. This is the coldest time of year because of the lag of seasons, and yet the days are beginning to grow longer. The sun's every day is a little bit lighter and brighter than the day before, and we begin to get glimpses of spring and feeling like spring is right around the corner, and yet in many places the earth is solid ice. And so this is the paradox of Aquarius. It's like we see glimmers of the future. We can put some of that stuff in the future together, but we're not quite there yet. Moving ahead, by January 23rd, we have the retrograde Mercury now lining up with the sun in Aquarius. Remember, we had Venus retrograde lining up with the sun, and I said that was an inferior conjunction because Venus was between the Earth and the sun. Well, this also is an inferior conjunction of Mercury because Mercury is retrograde and therefore it's between the Earth and the sun. And yet there's still an alignment of our intentions and our ideas and our thinking and the essence of our soul, the sun, our purpose. And it's almost like we can talk about our mission statement, and yet because Mercury is retrograde, it may be a bit difficult to find a way to jump in because there's so much going on in our mind that it's hard to find a place to begin running the energy, because it's like wherever we start, it's not quite the whole picture. And often we have a difficult time with that Mercury retrograde, not because there's anything wrong with Mercury retrograde or any planet retrograde. It's because the energy is intensified, because it's closer to Earth, and because it's louder, it's noisier, and sometimes it makes it difficult to find a way to express it. On January 23rd, we also have Mars making a half square to Saturn. Remember, Mars had made that square and a half to Uranus. That square and a half to Uranus was on the day that Uranus stationed back on January 18th. And so we have here another example of Mars making an aspect with Uranus. That's the kapow, bust through it. And now it makes an aspect with Saturn. And it's like, whoa, hold back. We can't do it quite that fast. And so, in both of these are hard aspects. A square and a half square are both anxious. They're both the energies are not meshing up, and it's not easy to communicate or to work the energies out because they're at odds with one another. And yet, it's still very powerful. That Mars Saturn half square can feel like frustration. It can feel like we were going along, and all of a sudden now something happens, and it's almost like back to home plate or back to first base or whatever that might be. The following day, on January 24th, Mars moves from Sagittarius into Capricorn. Mars is exalted in Capricorn. What does that mean? It means that when Mars is not in its domicile, its home sign of Aries, it prefers to be in Capricorn than anywhere else. Why? Well, because in Capricorn, Mars has the staying power that it needs in order to get the job done. Mars in Capricorn is completes what it starts. It has endurance, and it also gains satisfaction from actually applying the energy, sustaining it, and reaching the top of the mountain. But we now have Mars and Venus, Venus still retrograde, and Pluto in Capricorn. By January 25th, the following day, we have Mercury, which is retrograding, backing into Capricorn. It won't show here until the 26th because It happens late in the day, 7 p.m. on the 25th. So we're going to run this ahead one more day. And now we can see all of a sudden there's this conglomeration of planets back in Capricorn. It may feel like we're back to ground zero or back to the first floor or back to basics again. How'd we get here? We're not making the progress we thought. I would suggest, however, with Venus and Mercury both retrograde, what's going on now, even if it feels like we're redoing something that we've already done, don't worry about that. Those planets will both turn direct, and we can make use of what it is that we got accomplished here on this remedial course when Mercury and Venus were both not only retrograding, but retrograded back into Capricorn. That is on the 26th, 25th. Also on the 25th, the sun makes a half square with Neptune. Again, we have this kind of disjoint sense between our sense of where we're going into the future, the sun, with Neptune, our dreams, our illusions. This may be a day where some fantasy that we have or some idea that we've been holding on to as a potential maybe pops. Something becomes more real than we wish it would, because in fantasy it was perfect, and in reality it may still be great, but it may not have quite the buzz that it did when it was purely a dream. On the 28th, the sun makes a sextile with Chiron. Again, these sextiles with Chiron that we've seen, that we've seen with other planets this month, including Mercury, when Mercury, before Mercury turned retrograde, Mercury made those sextiles. Now, as the sun is making a sextile to Chiron, this again gives us the ability to work with the healing energy. The healing energy, though, from the sun sextile to Chiron is a little bit different than it was when Mercury sextiled Chiron. The Mercury sextile to Chiron was about communication. It was about interaction. It was about you talk, I listen. I talk, you listen. You talk, I listen. It's that give and take exchange that can be so important when we're trying to find a middle ground or to heal something from the past. But when the sun makes that sextile with Chiron, the energy may be more direct and more behavioral. In other words, it might be that someone does something that really is healing for something that we read a wrong way, or maybe we go out of our way and do something. And I'm not talking about something as simple or as obvious as buying someone flowers, but it might actually be a heartfelt motion that we make that in some way that person registers that acts as a potential for healing. I think with the sun sextile Chiron, I think of the lovely Dalai Lama statement. Dalai Lama says or said, when possible, be compassionate. It's always possible to be compassionate. So when possible, be compassionate. However, it's always possible. So this is a time where compassion, I think, goes a long way on this at this particular time, January 28th and 29th. Also, we have here Mercury retrograding over Pluto. I think this is exact on the 28th, but you'll see here on the 28th, it's on one side of Pluto, Mercury, and then by the 29th, that Mercury crosses over Pluto. Again, we have these plutonic energies that we've talked about, with the Venus going over Pluto, and the Mercury going over Pluto, first direct, now retrograde, and then in February it'll do it direct for a third and final time. These are chances that we have to speak about things that we don't normally speak about. These are chances that we have to bring things up out into the open, that as long as they're hidden, as long as they're buried, they get in the way. They're problematic. But we may be afraid to talk about them because we may be fearful of what someone might think about what we're going to say, or we may be worried that it's not going to go right, and it might be difficult. However, when we have that opportunity and we take it, it's almost always better than not having taken the opportunity at all, leaving the things in the underworld, leaving the things unspoken, where they gain power on us rather than giving us a chance to see them for what they are and work the energy through. On the 29th, we have Venus, which has retrograded all the way back to 11 degrees, 11 degrees of Capricorn. And so this is kind of encapsulating a period of time where we are in fact looking back to things that have happened over the past month or two, and we're going to, as Venus turns direct, we will have a potential, a third a third shot at making everything either okay or working the energy through. But this Venus turning direct on January 29th is very important. And again, it'll take several days for Venus to build up speed. And on the 30th, we also have the sun making a square to Uranus in Taurus. Now we have that sun square Uranus in Taurus, by the way, again is another example of how a planet, in this case the sun, first hits Taurus by square. This is disruptive. And look, that square between Uranus and Saturn is now 5 degrees, or nearly, it's pushing 5 degrees apart. Uranus at 1052, it's almost 11. So it's really 4+ degrees apart. But remember, just 1 month ago, these were exactly square. But here, the sun is making a disruptive square with Uranus. This is about something falling apart, something breaking through. This is about an energy that is disruptive and unexpected, quite the way it happens. And yet, within a few days, and it's not until next month, I'm going to run this ahead a couple of days, that it takes 5 days. And on February 4th, the sun actually catches up with Saturn, and that pulls the energy in, makes it serious. But again, it makes it stabilized. But again, the impact throughout 2022 is, rather than getting Uranus hold back, I'm sorry, rather than getting Saturn hold back, Uranus break through, now we're getting it the other way around. We're getting it the Uranus bust through, and then the Saturn hold back, make it real. One last thing that I got to talk about that I kind of screamed right through the mid-month full moon, and then the new moon right at the end of the month. I'd mentioned these dates at the very beginning. Let's take a look at the new moon first on January 31st. And that new moon on January 31st is at 9:46 p.m. So here we have the second new moon of the month. The first new moon was in Capricorn. This new moon is in Aquarius. This new moon is very much playing on the Saturn-Uranus square, even though that square is technically over. Why do I say that? Because it's right in the middle of that. If you were to find the midpoint degrees between the Uranus at almost 11 and the Saturn at 15, that would turn out to be around 12, 13 degrees. And so we have the sun is actually already past its square to Uranus and not quite reached its conjunction to Saturn. And so the new moon, over this day, over hours before and hours afterwards, will pick up on first the square to Uranus, kapow, explode, something new, something different. We talked about this already when we talked about the sun squaring Uranus. So this is a replay of that energy, and then it will hit the conjunction to Saturn just a few hours after the new moon. And there's the reality check. There's the pull it in, hold it back, make it real. And I think this new moon is incredibly potent, incredibly important. And it also has tied up in it the Venus trine Uranus. And so Venus is kind of backed up to a point of almost reaching it, but it's close enough that we have something new happening here. We're enamored with something. We see something we like. It might be different, it might be out of the box, but we're intrigued and it's exciting. And it's really interesting because on one hand, we have that Venus making that smooth aspect with Uranus, and then we also have the new moon, first the sun, but then the moon coming through, making a hard aspect with Uranus. The change isn't quite as easy as we would like it to be, perhaps, and then it lining up with Saturn, and it's either time to get real or time to answer to the judge, to the parent, to the law. How are we going to pay for this? But there's something that comes in behind it that that pulls back and says, make it real. Now, the one thing that we skipped over that I'm going to go back to is I want to take a quick look at the full moon on January 17th. Now, we'd already talked about when we were at this point in the month chronologically, we talked about how Mercury was turning retrograde on the 14th. So by this full moon on the 17th, Mercury is already retrograde. We also talked about how the sun joined up with Pluto on the 16th. That's still really close right now. That's just a little bit of a degree, over a degree of orb. And so we have the intensity of this full moon being opposite Pluto. That may be the strongest piece of information we have about this full moon, because that full moon is opposite Pluto maybe a couple of hours, a little bit over, maybe 2 or 3 hours prior to the full moon itself. The moon is opposite Pluto, and then it's actually technically full. This is about power struggle. This is about someone coming in with a different set of issues. It's about control. It's about domination. There's secrecy here. This is not an easy full moon. It's complicated, and it's complicated by the fact that Pluto is so close to the sun, and yet there's a drive to bring things out into the open. And so this full moon, I think, is also tied right around that Uranus stationary direct. That's on the 18th. And I think more than anything, we're going to find some surprises here of how deep and how complicated something is. It's like there's no simple fix, but here we are, and we have to deal with it. It's interesting this month that, like I said earlier, there's a lot going on, but what's going on is noise. It's interaction. When the faster moving planets turn retrograde or direct, and remember, Mercury and Venus are both stationing this month. Venus stationing to direct at the end of the month, and Mercury turning retrograde mid-month. That when the faster moving planets make more aspects than any of the other planets. And so when the faster moving planets slow down or even apparently stop, there's less aspects being made. And so this month is a quieter month from sheer number of aspects made, but it's also a relatively quiet month that there because Jupiter is new in a sign, and Jupiter doesn't really make any other aspects with any further out planets, that there's a sense that that there isn't a lot going on. There's a lot going on, but a lot of it is building up in a latent period of energy, building up stuff that's new and different, and that will begin to come out in the months ahead. So let's see how this plays out. I'm excited that 2021 is over. It seems to me that somehow we will look back at 2021 and it will be lumped into 2020, almost like almost like March of 2020 lasted nearly 2 years. It's just kind of a subjective way of looking at time, but it feels like we're finally moving away from whatever that was that stuck in molasses or frozen in time or caught in a whirlpool of energy. And although, like I said before, and I'll say again, we're not out of it yet, there's a feeling that we're finally on our way out. That's it. Think cosmically, act locally. I'll see you for the next monthly forecast. For those of you who want a mid-month forecast, it's only $3 a month for Patreon to get the mid-month forecast, which drills down quite a bit deeper day by day on the second half of the month. Go to patreon.com/Rick Levine. And other than that, I will see you here next month. By the way, don't forget to hit subscribe or like. It helps in the long run for me to build my readership here. Thank you very much. And that's it for now.